Have you ever heard of that test people talk about online sometimes where you visualize an apple in your head and it's on a gradient and it's like 1 through 5, and like number 5 is you can't even see the apple. Like if I told you to picture a red apple in your head, you can't see the apple. You just kind of know that you're thinking about an apple and what an apple is, but you can't see it. And then like as you go down from 5 to 1, it becomes increasingly more hyper realistic, where like number 3 is like you can kind of tell that there's an apple there, like you can see it, but you couldn't describe any like pot marks in it or any damage. And a number 1 is like you can see the apple like it's sitting there in front of you, and you can describe like a bite out of it. You can see the texture, you can spin it around. My imagination, or I don't even know if imagination is the right word for that, but my mental imagery has always been, I would say, on the higher end of like a number 1, but even maybe a little bit past that, where if you could visualize the apple, right? But then imagine yourself, not just that you're visualizing an apple, but that you're holding an apple. Now visualize yourself in a room holding that apple. Like, can you see the room? Can you tell if I told you to visualize yourself in a library at school holding an apple? How much of that scene builds itself in your head? Could you visualize yourself in the third person holding the apple? Can you visualize yourself looking at yourself from a table 5 or 6 feet away, standing there holding an apple in front of the window, looking outside? Imagine if I told you to visualize yourself in the middle of the desert with a thunderstorm in the background, and you're looking at yourself head on while you're holding this apple, and you see the glint of a rifle scope a mile away. Could you visualize that? Now stay with me here, because it might be a little weird, but imagine if that person holding that rifle, that glint of that scope that you saw, picture them firing the rifle. You can see them reach their hand down to the trigger, place their finger on the trigger, pull it back, and then you see the explosion from the rifle. You see the bullet fly out of the barrel, the puff of smoke. Visualize yourself in the third person looking directly at yourself holding this apple as that bullet is flying towards you from the distance, and just as it's getting close enough to you, you like tilt your head to the side and it hits the apple, and the apple explodes and all the pieces go everywhere. Are you able to picture all of that down to the weather at the time, the wind, the feeling of the apple as like the round flies through it and rips the apple apart? The point I'm getting at is that my mental imagery has always been pretty out there and abstract, and one of the most impactful things about it has always been dreaming. You know that point when you're falling asleep and you're trying to drift off to sleep, and you're like in between being awake and being asleep? There's a term for that, a medical term. I think it's hypnagogia. And for many people, this is the point where dream-like hallucinations or sleep paralysis happens, and for me it's no different. But ever since I was young, like this happens, I don't want to say every night, but multiple times a week, or I would say 7 out of 10 times I go to sleep, I experience some sort of lucid dream or sleep paralysis. And if you ever had sleep paralysis, then I don't need to tell you that can be pretty freaky. And it's not always freaky, but more often than not it is. And for example, one of the most memorable times I've had is I remember when I was younger, I got a gift. A friend of the family bought me like a stuffed panther, and I'm sure everybody can picture in their head what like a Black Panther. Just think of like a Black Panther. The thing about this one though is it was a life-size, like 1-to-1 stuffed recreation of a panther, and I think I was like 10 or 11 at the time, and they decided that this is what they wanted to get me. And the first night I had it, the very first night, I took this panther and I put it in my room, and it sat maybe, I don't know, 10 feet from my bed. I just put it up against the wall because I had nowhere else to put it. That night, falling asleep, and the sleep paralysis kicks in, and I'm looking around, and this panther, the the yellow eyes on the panther start to glow, and it stands up. So the stuffing was in a seated position where it's kind of laid out like if you ever had a dog, the way like your dog would lay, where it's kind of like got its paws like flat on the ground, it's on its stomach, but the head is up, just kind of looking. That's the way that this panther was like stuffed. This panther in this sleep paralysis hallucination, the eyes start to glow, and it stands up and it walks itself over to my bed and climbs up onto my bed and places its paws on my chest, and then begins to press its weight down on me on the bed. And if you've ever had experienced anything like this, then you know that you can feel this. You can feel the weight. You can hear the sounds. I could hear the panther's breathing. I could hear like the growl coming from deep within it, and I could feel its weight of its paws pressing me down into my bed. Now, I don't know if this is typical or if anybody else that has sleep paralysis experiences something like this, but this would happen multiple times a week, where this panther would prowl itself around my bed. It would walk over to me. It would touch me. It would rest on me, and I could feel this. I could see it. I could hear it, and I knew it was moving. But the second you would break out of the sleep paralysis, it's just a panther. And like I said, I was maybe 10 or 11, and after a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I'd tell them, you have to take this thing back. I can't have this in my room. But this is just one experience. Another one that would get me pretty good is, so I've always had a fear of home invasion, just on a general sense. And ever since I was a kid, now I would get this recurring sleep paralysis hallucination where there was this, I don't know how to describe it other than, if you could picture, I guess like a clown back in the day, but if I can, I'll try to find an image to really fit this. But it was like, there was an old cartoon of the moon, and the moon had like a big giant smile on its face, right? Now, if you took that face and mixed it with like a clown, and it was like a diamond shape, but like if you flip the diamond upside down, where the point is up at the top, and then the larger side is near the bottom. So that's roughly what this clown moon-faced entity looked like. And I had this dream where it would somehow find its way into my house, and it would slowly make its way towards where I was in bed. Now, growing up, a lot of times I always had the upstairs or attic room. So as I fell asleep, I could hear this thing. It had like a rumble to it, and I could hear it make its way into the house, make its way up the stairs, down the hallways, and it would search for its way to find its way to me. And it would try to get in through vents, and it would try to come under the door, and it would slowly make its way to me to the point where it would finally get to me. And when it got to me, it would hover right above me, and it would just look at me, and I could see it, and I could look right back at it. And depending on, I don't know if it was how tired I was or wasn't, but sometimes I would fall asleep like this with this thing looking at me, or sometimes it would bring me back out of my slumber, and then the sleep would be canceled, and I would have to try to fall asleep again. Now, that's not to say that this thing would come find me every day or even every week. This was, when I say recurring, this happened maybe once every 2-3 months, something like that. But I mean, enough for this to still be a dreadful experience to have happened. And ever since, I still really am terrified of the thought of somebody breaking into my house, because this thing might be real one day. I mean, I sure hope it's not a real thing, but the very thought of it is pretty freaky. Now with that in mind, you can see how if you already have a very vivid imagination, then it's not too surprising to imagine what like a typical dream for me is like. We would be here all day if I try to get into explaining what that's like. But I'll just sum it up and say I explain it to people around me. It's like when I dream, it's almost as if I'm either part of a movie or I'm watching a movie. But there's usually like a structure. There's like, I don't want to say a script, but there's characters. There's like motivations. There's a backstory, and usually this all plays out in one night. Like one dream is one movie played out over one night for me, where the things will progress. Like there was a recent dream I had was I either had died, which by the way is a very common thing for me. I die many times in my dreams, and it's like I said, it's a very common thing. But in this one, I had either died or I was going to die, and the premise was there was a company that my significant other had went to that managed to put my brain together in like I guess you could sum it up as a simulation or a computer, but they were able to synthesize me back together again so that I could handle last rites or last businesses and stuff. Now I only had 2 hours total. So every person I've ever met showed up so that I could give my last thoughts and words and directions to these people. And I mean, I can remember the dream talking, and I mean talking like you would in a movie, or I guess as you would in real life, where I explained to everybody what's happening and what's going on, and I go down the list and tell each and every person. And the memories are, it's at the point, as I remember the dream, where what I said to the people in the dream is pretty much what I would say to them in real life if such a thing were to happen. And that's typically like a typical dream for me. So like I said, I don't want to get too into it, but with all of this in mind, you can see how it wouldn't be too much for one's imagination to begin to bleed into the day-to-day life. And I mean that to say that if you can imagine something that is more than a daydream but less than a hallucination, if that makes sense. Like, if you can imagine yourself daydreaming about whatever, or thinking about what you're gonna do next, but then think about like a hallucination. Like, imagine if you hallucinated a tiger following you through the park, right? Imagine something that's like in between of that, where you're walking through the park and you get the feeling that there will be a tiger in the park following you, so you leave. Does that make sense? Where it's you get the feeling that the tiger is there, or it's impending, it's on its way, so you do something about it. You move out of the way, you leave, or you kick it into high gear and you just say, listen, I got a weird, funny feeling. And I'm sure many people, I'm not saying that I'm one of a kind, right? I believe many people can relate to what I'm talking about, where you just say, without any basis, you just feel that something kind of silly. Like, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to the feeling of saying that they are, like, imagine if you're like in a shady part of town in the middle of nowhere at night, right? You might imagine, a mugger, right? A mugger might show up and get you, so you decide to pick up the pace, right? But imagine you're thinking about, like, you're in a shady part of town and you're imagining a giant vulture coming to get you, right? You don't have any reason to expect this to even be in the realm of possibility, right? But the very thought of this vulture coming to get you is enough to kind of make you pick up the pace, right? Even though that's kind of silly. So that kind of gets us to what I want to talk about is what happens if this is already a pretty typical thing. What happens when you push it even a little bit further and get into different substances. So if anyone knows me, I've always been a lightweight when it comes to like smoking weed or drinking alcohol or anything, and I've always reached my state of inebriation way quicker than everyone else. So one of my friends came up with the idea to try some edibles one day, and it was just me and them, and I don't know what. I know edibles come in, like, if you do the edible gummies, they come in like different intensities or amounts, like different milligrams or megagrams or whatever. And I couldn't tell you what these ones were, but if anyone's tried edibles before, then you probably already know how this goes. Is you take like one or two and nothing happens for a while, for a couple of, maybe up to an hour. Literally, like, you don't feel any different and nothing happens. So you end up taking another one and eating more, or like the brownies, you eat more, and nothing happens until all of a sudden it's all hitting you all at once. Now it's happening, right? Now, of course, being my first time, that's exactly what I did. But I ate probably 7 or 8 of these gummies, and it even makes me a little queasy to the stomach even thinking about it still. But I ate maybe 7 or 8 of these things, and my buddy I was with was not a good trip wizard at all. So what I want to get into is, I don't really want to talk very much about the trip itself, because it's not exactly the most interesting part of this story. But in a very brief nutshell, it was an extremely intense trip that I had. It started off it set in very quickly. What I remember was I had come up while I was waiting for these gummies to set in. I decided that I wanted to cook myself a steak. So I went in the kitchen and I started cooking the steak. My buddy is out in the living room watching TV or something. And so I'm cooking this steak, and I decided to go out and ask him into the living room. I went out to that living room and asked him, how does he want his steak? And he was laying on the floor in the living room. And the only way I can describe it is, looking down at him, the way that he was laying, he was in the shape of a W, like the letter W. If you can imagine a letter W, like a big giant letter W on your carpet in the middle of your living room. And I remember thinking it was really funny the way he was laying there. And it was funny looking at a big W, a big talking W in the middle of the room. So I don't remember asking him how he wanted his steak or whatever, but what I do remember is I went back into the kitchen to go check on the steak. And if you picture in your head a square inside of another square inside of another square, progressively getting smaller, that's what happened when I went back into the kitchen. The room closed on me extremely quickly. Like the ceiling came down at me, the walls came at me, and instantly I was trapped in the corner of my kitchen. And I could not even think or imagine my way out of this situation. I couldn't remember that there was my living room. I couldn't remember that there was an outside or anything. All I knew is that I was in the living room. I was in the kitchen, and I was trapped in the corner. And so I started asking for help. And long story short, my buddy had sat me on my recliner. I had a rocking recliner chair at the time, and he sat me there, and he put on a movie. If you ever seen the movie with Martin Lawrence, Big Mama's House, he puts on Big Mama's House. Now, last time I had watched this movie was when I was a kid, like a real kid, like maybe 6 or 7 years old. And what ended up happening briefly was that I had the image of, I had fallen back into my own head. So like my perspective was behind my eyes. It wasn't like looking at the world through my eyes. It was looking at the world from the back of my eyes, like from inside of my skull. And I could see myself sitting there. And the TV that was in my living room was not my TV from my living room, but it was my TV from when I was a kid, last time I watched Big Mama's House. And the TV that I was watching wasn't Big Mama's House. It was what would have been the perspective of my eyes in the present day. So it might be a little tricky to visualize, but my trip was, I was a kid again inside of my present day skull, looking at the TV, looking at the back of my eyes at the TV, which was playing what my eyes in the present day would have seen. So I was in the past looking at the present day through the TV in the past. So I was like looking at the future through the past, if that makes any sense. And that threw me for like a existential spiral, and like I said, I don't really. It's not the most important thing, but it was not a very pleasant experience, and that remained like this for hours, where I was trapped on this recliner, thinking about the past. Like I thought I was a kid again, looking at my future self, and that I could see things coming. Like I was seeing the future before it happened, which meant that the future was inevitable, which led me to have an existential crisis as a kid again in the present day, if that makes any sense. Because like if I was watching the future, then that meant I had no bearing on the future, which caused an existential crisis. So the interesting part that I want to talk about is what happened after. Now, the next day was not good. The next day I was deathly sick. I was throwing up pretty much the whole next to the rest of the day, and I did not feel good at all. And I remember I had this if you can imagine red scan lines, like I don't know how to put it into words. If you could imagine if your vision was a bunch of lasers instead of like your normal vision, like you saw everything as a laser. So first you had to scan things, and then you knew what they were once you scanned it. Like that's what I remember, is my vision was red, and it was a bunch of lasers that were telling me what I was looking at. And all the while, my vision kept spinning upwards, so my eyes kept trying to roll backwards into my head, so I kept like unwillingly looking at the ceiling. So I had to like keep looking back down to look at something, but then my eyes would go straight back up to the ceiling. And like I said, that was pretty much the whole day, alongside throwing up. Now, what is interesting is what started happening the next couple days and weeks after that is, so I had mentioned what it was like to be extremely sleepy, and I would be somewhat dreaming, right? Once I'm very, very, very sleepy, like ready to fall asleep. After I did this, after I had this like massive ingestion of these edibles like this, and after that trip I had, that was no longer the case. I was just straight up dreaming in general, day after day after day. And my dreams and my thoughts and whatever was running through my head would immediately appear and manifest in real time. So I was, for maybe 2 months, I was having straight up hallucinations. Now, they were never terrifying like my sleep paralysis was, because for some reason when I would see them, they didn't bother me like sleep paralysis did. So if you remember the diamond clown thing, right? I would see that thing, and it would just be, it would meander around my apartment, and I would see it, and it didn't bother me anymore. It was just there, and it would just move around looking at things. And it was like, I don't want to say it was like it was living with me, but it would be there, and then it would fade away, and then it would be there, and then it would fade away. Or a really weird thing that would happen is I would have these pictures or flashes of being in different times at different places, and I had this, the one that was pretty regular was I would have now I'm talking like a flash for like less than a second, but it was long enough to know where I was and what I was doing. So I had like I would be doing whatever, right? Driving or working on something or reading something, and for a split second I would be walking up the stairs to a temple somewhere, like in the jungle or in space or something. But I knew I was walking up the stairs to a temple. There was if you picture like the Mayan temples from back in the day, covered in moss, like vines everywhere. I would be briefly there. Or there was another one where, and this should sound familiar, where I was walking. So I remember I was driving, and for a split second I was face to face with a tiger, and the tiger was looking at me straight in my eyes for a split second. Another one is working on my car. I would, for a split second, I was back home, but it wasn't my house. I was in like someone else's house, like completely laid out differently. And things like this would happen every day, all day. And it stayed like this, like I said, for about 2 weeks. I didn't feel right anymore, and more than anything, it felt like I was no longer who I was as a person anymore. Like not even that I was just like changed, but it like I didn't belong to myself anymore. Like I didn't own who I was anymore. That I had completely broken free from my body for what it was, and I was now just a source of energy examining the world around me outside of myself. So the point being that for the first 2 weeks, it was an extremely intense living, waking dream for me. And it was very interesting how taking these edibles and going on this trip like this had broken the separation of being awake and being asleep. I was in a waking dream for 2 intense weeks. And like I said, this went on in total for about 2 months, if I can remember correctly. And as time went on, it had waned off. But it took around that time before I felt like everything was back to where it was supposed to be. But the first 2 weeks now, I was able to still go to work just fine. I was still able to drive and go shopping and take care of myself and everything like that. But alongside of everything I was doing, there were multiple hallucinations, auditory, physical, visual, mostly, where anything that I was thinking would reveal itself as whatever I was thinking about. It would paste itself into my world. My thoughts would bleed into the real world. If I was thinking about my dog, I had a dog at the time, and if I would think about my dog, and I remember looking at him, and I thought about him having wings and sliding around on my floor on his belly, and that's what I saw. Or like I said, the clown thing in my apartment, or going to work, I would the lines in the road were warped or changing colors, or the cars weren't cars anymore. They were looking at me and stuff, and it was unbelievable to me. It was unbelievable that this was happening, and I couldn't even put it into words and explain it to anybody, because at the same time that I knew they were hallucinations, it was all completely normal. It didn't bother me. I wasn't upset, and it didn't freak me out. So it's like if I tried to tell you that everything you were experiencing right now, even just sitting here listening to this video, if I told you like this was all like a dream, it wouldn't really make any sense though, because as far as you're concerned, it's all completely grounded. But what if it was all a hallucination? Like even me talking right now could have been a hallucination for you. That's what it was like for me, where at the same time, looking back at it now, I know what is and what now looking back at it, and with 20/20 vision, looking backwards, I know what was and what wasn't a hallucination at the time. But at the time, it was all just normal. I wasn't hallucinating at the time. At the time, everything I saw was just what it was, without any cause for concern. Now, the final thing about it, but the one that was the most troubling for me personally, was the hallucinations I was having. The first 2 weeks were, like I said, it was either physical, visual, auditory, and that was fine. Once those 2 weeks passed and it stopped happening so much, what actually started happening after the 2 weeks, as the actual hallucinations started to wane, is I started going through time jumps where I would let's say, for instance, where I would I would be waking up from sleeping, and I would have the idea where I wanted to go and take a shower. Next thing I knew, I was already in the shower, taking the shower. The whole process of getting up, getting out of bed, getting undressed, and getting into the shower was missing. And then when I would come back to lucidity for a second to realize that, and then next thing I know, I'm at work already. I had already gotten in my car, already driven to work, and I'm at work checking in for work. Next thing I know, I'm halfway through my shift. Now I'm out at lunch. And this started to then, after, like I said, it first started happening after the 2 weeks. But when it did, it started to ramp up faster and faster, where now it felt like I was jumping through hours of the day at a time. And this started happening more and more these next 2 weeks. Now this is what dragged out for the 2 months, where at random times I would jump forward again through time again, and this was the most mentally straining part of this entire experience. This is what for me personally was the most concerning. I couldn't understand how this was even happening, where it felt like to me I was either falling asleep or running on autopilot this way, where I didn't even have any cognizance of doing things, where I would have conversations with people that I couldn't remember, or I would eat dinner before I even planned on doing it. And then at the end, the most interesting thing is it just stopped one day. One day it was like I was put back together again, and then it never happened again. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it was, but at some point it had just stopped. Just as quickly as it started happening, it had stopped, and that was it. And then I think that's it for this video. I have more to say about it, but I think I'll save that for another time. But I just thought it was interesting. See ya.